Hi, welcome to part 40 of my operating series of model railroad videos. This time it's a long overdue complete mainline tour of the Burlington Northern Model Railroad set in 1973 in the Seattle region and taken from a spy cam in the first car behind the locomotives. For today's video, we're actually going to break from tradition and run a modern double-stack train, which makes no sense except that we ran this double-stack train all the way around the entire layout and took video from spy cams that were hidden inside the front white container there you see on the picture. So I thought, let's just drive the train all the way around the layout, and I'll narrate all the locations so you can see from the trackside view all the places on the railroad. Let's dive right in, shall we? I'll post maps of the layout as we go around so you can try to follow where we are in the basement. It's not easy, but we'll do our best to keep on track. We're starting out our run in the Inner Bay Yard in North Seattle, and we're going by, on the right, the Inner Bay Engine Terminal, and on the left we just passed the Inner Bay Car Repair Shops. In the inset, you can see the view out of the back of our train, which I'll just show for a couple of minutes so you can get oriented, but I don't have that for the entire tour. Now we're passing under the Emerson Street Bridge, and in the inset, you can see that we have left the Dravis Street Bridge. There's quite a distance between the head end and the rear end of this long double-stack train, so these two images seem a little out of sync, but that's the same as what happens if you're following the engineer versus the conductor in the caboose. Those cars against the backdrop are on the Terry Avenue line, which is now called South Lake Union, and the suburban houses are in the neighborhood of Magnolia. Now we're crossing over the Salmon Bay Bridge number 4. On the right there, you see downtown Ballard before passing the Ballard station on the left. We'll see that station again when we come back the other direction on the track to our left. There's a nice overall room view, and these trees in the foreground represent the Golden Gardens Park, and also, for that matter, the Carkeek Park that many of my prototype videos are shot from. This is a section of double track on the prototype, as it is on the model railroad. And you can see in the inset, the rear end of our train has finally made it out of the yard. Coming up on the right is a camouflage tunnel portal, which is totally fictitious, but creates a cutoff loop back to the south staging yard, which is behind this hillside that we've been driving along. I'll take you back there at the very end of the video. We'll go into the staging yard. And the track that we're adding to the left is called the milepost yard for milepost 31. Where we are right now is coming around the corner towards Mukilteo on what's called Main 2, the farthest main away from the aisle, where we've also incorporated Everett Junction. I posted a map of the continuous loop that we're running for this layout tour in case that's helpful. The tank cars on the left are from the Department of Defense facility that used to import kerosene for use in the supersonic U-2 spy planes that were based in Spokane Air Force Base. Now we're heading up the High Line towards the Delta Yard. Up above you see the narrow gauge empire, which is wrapped around the peninsula in the center of the room, and a fuel loading rack that was recently scratch-built by Robin Peel. Very nice. It's an imitation of the Chama, New Mexico facility. We had some issues when we first started running the double-stack train, which required us to take a few of the cars out of service. That's why they're parked here in what you would be able to see as the Delta Yard, but it's blocked by this bank of containers. This gives you a good perspective that I'm on the upper deck of containers with this camera. And if you really want to see Delta Yard, there are plenty of other videos in my channel that feature it. Now, the first thing we do is come around the corner from the Delta Yard and head up the eastbound main line towards Skykomish. And all of that stuff in the background we'll see in other loops of the basement as we go along. This might be a good time to show you the overall track plan if you want to study it. Across the aisle there is the town of Burlington, with the prominent Mount Baker photograph in the backdrop. You can see there's a second double-stack train over in that town, which we'll be seeing some footage of in a minute. This is a long, gradual, approximately 1.6% grade that leads all the way up to the Skykomish staging yard, which is our easternmost point on the railroad. Above to the right, you can see the narrow gauge town of Paradise. We won't be touring the narrow gauge part of the layout today. Some other day we'll do something like this with the narrow gauge. Now down on the left you can see the drill press in my shop area, which is just off the side of the Bayside yard in Everett. Now we go into a removable tunnel because that whole piece of scenery can be taken off if we have a maintenance problem. Very handy. And if you noticed that in the very back you saw a container train on the far wall. And I took a picture of that train. It was the second double-stack train we were running. And while we charge up the hill towards Skykomish, in the inset you can see there the second container train coming down from Burlington across the Stillaguamish Bridge. I wonder if it's pronounced Stillaguamish or Stillaguamish. Now the train is approaching the Skykomish River Bridge, which is near the town of Everett and the Delta Y. We'll get to that later. For right now, we're just climbing up the side of the hill towards what I call the Index Loop, which is near Mount Index. Along the back wall there, you can see the upper Bellingham staging as well as the Inner Bay Yard. There we go, that's Mount Index painted on the backdrop. And there is a loop on the prototype main line right near Mount Index, so I thought this was a reasonably good approximation of the prototype to have this turnback curve located right here. We're rounding the corner to approach the Skykomish yard, and that is as far east as we have room to take this railroad. The railroad's in a 30 by 24 foot basement. There's my favorite shot of all the trains coming towards us from Chicago and Minneapolis. Each of those trains has about 10 or 12,000 horsepower on it and about 25 cars behind it. Above the Skykomish staging yard is the combination of the Milwaukee Limestone Junction branch and the Ferndale branch, which goes out to the Alcoa aluminum plant in Ferndale, just north of Bellingham. That flood loader is the Limestone Junction loader, which used to load old used ore jennies with the limestone. The Milwaukee Road would take them from there down to Bellingham. Now we're going across the famous Rainbow Bridge, which is a tilt-up bridge that we normally only use for restaging, but of course today for doing an entire loop of the main line, we left it down and now we're driving across the open aisleway. There's no scenery, it's just a turnaround loop. And we'll have a nice shot of what that looks like from another angle in a minute.
Well, I really like what Magnus did here with the gate entry. That looks pretty cool.
Up in Skykomish, we do have a big timber company. You can see the logs here that need to be taken down to the sawmill. And there's the inset view showing the Rainbow Bridge on the top level and our other double-stack train on the lower level making its way down from Bellingham towards Everett.
Colorful contrast here, too.
Now that we've made that turnback loop, our train is facing the other direction up in Skykomish. It's now heading from Chicago towards Seattle, and so now we're a westbound train. And there you can see to the right the turnback loop that goes off to the right there. We just traveled that route a minute ago, and now we're on the left-hand main, or the siding, I guess you would call it. And of course, like I said, we're heading westbound now. Meanwhile, the lower train is going into the tunnel which leads towards Bayside Yard. We'll see that later. By the way, pay no attention to the timestamp in the upper right-hand corner. The spy cams are hard to program, so I didn't bother to change the date on that. The F unit to the left of the locomotive there contains a camera car that I use for the dispatcher to be able to see what trains are up there. But it looks kind of cool, have an engine up there. Now we're heading across and up a connector track that I built in order to allow us to run from Skykomish up to Bellingham staging. The prototype wouldn't have done that, but for a model railroad it's handy to be able to reposition trains. And this bridge is just going across a big gap in the scenery. And now we're moving around towards the Bellingham staging tracks, which curve around the side of the wall, and you can see next to the backdrop there 2 trains that are made up and ready to go coming down from Vancouver, British Columbia towards Seattle. Well, we're about a third of the way through our tour now, and now that we're in the Bellingham staging yard, we're heading south from Vancouver, British Columbia. Down to the right below, you can see the Inner Bay Yard in Seattle, and you can also see me taking a picture of the other train going across the bridge just south of Everett's Bayside Yard, which we call the Squid Bridge, as you know if you've been watching my other videos. But I digress. We're going past the 2 basement windows, and there's Tim coming down the stairs that lead to the basement. The 2 windows are important because they give us ventilation and light during the daytime. There's the motive power for the 2 trains, and now we're going through the south throat of the Bellingham staging yard. And this is a very tricky little spot where we have a very steep, short grade that goes down from Bellingham staging to the beginning of the main line. The main line has a drop bridge there across the aisle that leads from the stairs.
Looks pretty good for factory twice weathering.
Tim is admiring these locomotives, which are recent ScaleTrains releases.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with them.
They belong to Dave.
The way you look and the way they sound and the way they run, actually.
Yeah.
And he really likes them. They have ESU decoders.
Are they the rivet counter?
Yeah, the rivet counter.
So now we're going across Paul Scoles' famous module from his book, Realistic Scenery with Paul Scoles. I had to rebuild the bridge so that it would handle this kind of traffic. Rather than that, I just basically installed it in the basement here after he was threatening to throw it away. On the left is the concrete branch and northwest olivine, which made very fine sand used in locomotive sanding bins. And now we pull into the main Burlington yard, which is a 5-track wonder on the prototype, which is very fun to model. But looks like we're heading towards a wreck. You see that skewed container in front of our engines? Eesh, we're about to hit it. Bang! Scrape, crash, scrape, bang. And it turns out that there was a spare piece of intermodal equipment that we didn't realize was derailed at this spot. So we almost lost the weed sprayer car to the floor, but fortunately Dave caught it in time. So this is reality model railroading. We ended up with this slight stall, but we cleared the main line quickly and got back into gear. On the right-hand side is a maintenance of way track that we use for the weed sprayer train. I put a map up so you can look in the inset there. And then to the right of that, next to the edge of the layout, is what I call the Anacortes branch. It's basically a long staging track because I don't have room for the real Anacortes branch. But if you've studied this area, you know that Burlington is a very cool place because the Anacortes branch went to the west and the concrete branch went to the east, and they met at a Y, ran a crossing, a diamond crossing.
Did you get your soldering done?
I really enjoy this particular location on the railroad, and the station on the prototype was actually at the end that we've already passed, but I have room for the station up here on the south end, so that's what we have is a station here.
Yeah, that's a challenge. Yep, it's just sad layers.
I also inserted a limestone mine here with that Jenny's there so that we have a rock train that comes and picks up limestone and takes it down to the cement plant in South Seattle. As you probably know, this is the bridge over the Skagit River, and the prototype is 3 spans, but I just had room for 2 here. And then this is the Mount Vernon station, which is just south of the Skagit River, and Mount Vernon has some staging tracks for those industries. The next river we come to is the Stillaguamish River. That's just a stock Walthers kit that I built. And then on the left, above the retaining wall, is a little switching puzzle that I stuck in to represent the Woodinville branch. And we won't be running on the Woodinville branch today, but it's fun to take cars up there. This area, the layout's not too well scenic yet, but we'll get there eventually. This is more like a 2% downhill grade, and we're coming into the Delta Y. There on the left you can see the track that goes off towards the east, and we're staying straight on the track that goes to the south, across the Snohomish River Bridge, and into a tunnel which doesn't exist in the prototype, but I needed it in order to manage some complicated scenery that I was building. Now you can really see those number board lights. We emerged from the tunnel into Everett's Bayside Yard, and you've seen lots of photographs of this in many of my other videos. It's actually 2 yards. The tracks to the right are the new yard, which was built later in the railroad's history, and the 3 tracks to the left are what was called the Scott's Yard because it was used to serve the Scott paper mill, which was the subject of some switching moves in my previous video called Part 39. But never mind, this is Part 40. We're just blowing right through Bayside. There was a grade crossing there that he just honked for, and there's a little passenger station. And you can't see over on the left, but there's also a nice turntable for storing some locomotives. At this point, we're coming across what we fondly call the Squid Bridge because I have a squid down in the water chasing a couple in a rowboat. This brings us to what's called the low line, which was the line that went from the Bayside Yard to Everett Junction. On the left is the Delta Yard, which has the extra containers. One of them is so askew it's kind of scary to see it, that dark brown container. really needs to be straightened out. Anyway, the low line comes around and meets the high line at the Everett Junction. And this is where all the traffic from the north and the east comes together and heads south along the shoreline. There's a track coming down, and Everett Junction is right there where that switch is on the left of the locomotive. There's a team track in Mukilteo, which is where we are now, and I plan to do a video about a train called the Oiler, which was the local that went between Seattle and Everett, and it switched the team track there. At this point, we're in double track mainline all the way into Seattle. And the track coming in from the left is the branch up to Payne Field where Boeing had its 747 factory. And you've probably seen the jet job operate out of there, and it runs caboose first from there back to Everett. The track curving off to the right is the Ballard branch or the Fremont branch, depending on which era you model. And in a minute we'll pass the Ballard station, which was torn down in the 70s but was used for commuter service. And after that, we'll see the bridge number 4, which is the famous Great Northern lift bridge that spanned the Salmon Bay and the Lake Washington Ship Canal. You can see on the inset the fun we're having with these trains. I think the inset was taken a second pass when we had another train running, but that's fine. You get the idea. Now the train has passed underneath the Emerson Street overpass, and we're entering the Inner Bay Yard in Seattle, where we started the tour going in the opposite direction. The inset shows you the black dot that we're located right in the center of the layout here. We're switching over to the A track and enjoying some ancient motive power from the 70s in the B track, which of course is what we normally run here, but today we're running a modern train. For some reason, I'm not quite sure, but we're enjoying ourselves, so that's what matters, since model railroading is fun. There you can see in the inset that the end of our train is coming into the yard, while the head end of the train is basically leaving the yard. I'm not sure why the engineer is not blowing for the grade crossings, but normally there's 3 or 4 grade crossings here that need to be protected, as I often mention in my videos. I like the way that this backdrop turned out a lot. It always makes me feel like we are going through downtown Seattle, even though it's just one big poster photo that I took. And I was able to get my son to paint Mount Rainier on the backdrop here. And Mount Rainier, of course, is the signature volcanic peak in the Seattle area. The North Portal is where the main line dives into a tunnel and goes underneath downtown Seattle, and then it emerges in South Seattle at the Stacy Street Yard. I think we came to a stop here because we're going to have a meet with the other double-stack train. And Dave wanted to make sure that we weren't going to have a collision before he entered the yard. It was a smart thing to do. The fidelity's not great of the sound, but at least you're getting to have some fun listening to the engine rev up. The Milwaukee Road operated a barge out of Seattle, and you can see some extra engines there and the barge off to the right. Now we're passing that other double-stack train and occupying the 2 main tracks in the yard. To the right is the arrival departure tracks of Stacy Street. To the left of the double-stack train is a track called the Mud Track, where all northbound cars would set out anything they needed to leave in South Seattle. The inset shows where we are in the layout now, moving south from Bulmer Yard towards Argo. You see there's a maintenance of way track there, as well as some extra RS3s that just arrived on the scene. That's a nice little factory backdrop that was given to me by Norm Bruce when he moved here. And of course that's the main water pipe for the house. We got to camouflage that. We're blowing for the Royal Brome crossing that leads to the Seattle's Kingdom. Now on the left, you have the Argo Yard, which is both the coach yard for the passenger service, as well as the interchange yard for the Milwaukee and the Union Pacific, as shown in the inset diagram. On the right is a track that we're moving on to now called the Colorado Main, and this goes across a bridge across the Duwamish River and gives us a turnaround that is the southernmost turnback loop, very much paralleling the Rainbow Bridge that you see above us there, which is the eastbound turnaround loop at Skykomish. I love how you can hear the clickety-clack as we go across this bridge. There's several tracks to the right of this retaining wall in hidden staging, which represent both the Renton branch, where the Boeing made the 737s, and the Darrington branch, which was a logging area. The inset shows the track diagram if you want to study it. Now we've made our complete loop around, and the Argo Yard is now on our right. And the South Seattle Intermodal Terminal is on the left, where a lot of the piggyback traffic was managed. We're crossing over to Main 2 now, and the track to the left of our locomotive is where we were just a minute ago before we went across the Duwamish River. And the E units there in Great Northern paint are used for the passenger service out of Seattle, in the early 70s, of course. There's that water main. I like to move it, but it's too big a project. The other big pipe there is the exhaust pipe for the spray booth, and it's always good to have a spray booth if you're trying to do model railroading, if you want to get an airbrush going. These are the new Bowser RS3s, which are absolutely beautiful in the SP&S paint. Again, to the right of the locomotive, you see that mud track, and it's got some cars on it because recently a northbound train came out of Portland staging and it dropped some cars off for Stacy, and we haven't gotten around to doing that switching. Maybe that would be another good subject for an operations video.
Yeah, I plugged it in and the plug is in the right place. What is that?
You can see that Boeing parts car there, called the tool car. That'll be taken to the Renton branch on the Renton Rocket, which was the name of that local.
Yeah, it's in the right. It's in the property.
Now we're entering the tunnel underneath downtown Seattle again. Of course, this time we're going from south to north. And the last time we saw it a couple minutes ago, we were going the opposite direction. This, of course, is going under the stairway that leads down to the basement. And I was lucky that the elevation of the stair tread just worked out pretty well for what I needed to do with the elevation of Inner Bay Yard. Well, as you can probably guess, we're getting close to the end of our tour now. We're going past downtown Seattle again, this time northbound instead of southbound. And we're approaching the Inner Bay Yard once again. And this time we're going to be on the main line instead of the A track. And I believe we're going to terminate our run here on the main line, having made a complete loop all around the layout, except for the staging yard. We'll get to that in a second. A caboose, of course, is very out of place in the modern era, but it makes total sense in 1973 with those other locomotives that we passed the other direction. Now we're coming up on the Drava Street overpass again, which is a really wonderful rail fanning spot in Seattle, both on the prototype and on this model railroad. To the right is the Inner Bay Engine Terminal, where many of the engines were serviced that were used in the north-south and the east-west traffic that BN and now BNSF run. So here's one more review of where we've been. We went to the east, and then we took the shortcut to the north and came back from the north to the south, and then we turned around in the south and came back north to this point. All that's left to see is the hidden south staging yard. But before I show you that, let's just do a little bit of rail fanning with these double stack trains. This time I just want you to see how I put a spy camera inside a 48-foot container that's on the second level of the double stack train. From this angle you can see that I drilled a little hole just slightly bigger than a 1/4-inch hole that was big enough for the lens of the spy camera, and it's up there in the upper left hand of the front of the box. That's a nice looking train, isn't it? And you can see the camera in there. I didn't quite have room for a battery to give it more life, but that's how I took the pictures for this whole loop around the layout. The nice thing about it is that it's up above the height of the locomotives, even these big modern locomotives, so it gives you a nice idea of where you are, even though nobody would really be allowed to ride there. One of these days we'll try it with a string of F units. That'll be cool. It's also worth noting, with this S-curve here, the super elevation is tilting to the left in the early part, and then it shifts over and tilts to the right where the train is now, which is super fun to watch, but it's a little hard to catch on this video. Well, our train is pulling into Inner Bay. I speeded this up 2 times, and now I want to show you what it looks like inside the hidden staging yard, just for completeness. So let's race around through the downtown tunnel, past the Stacy Street yard, further south towards the cargo yard on the left, like we did before, and now we'll dive into the hidden South Seattle staging yard. I set up the camera car on the Argo yard lead with some very nice locomotives, and we're just going to push it all the way into the hidden staging yard. This represents Tacoma and Portland to the south of the Seattle region. Those little white tents that you see next to the track are the end of track markers so that I can keep track of how long each staging track is and not shove a car back into the staging track that's too long for it. I'll do a video on that sometime. Not that I recommend hidden staging tracks. I don't. I've speeded this video up because how interesting is it to see the inside of a hidden staging yard. You can see there are 6 tracks there, plus the 7th track on the right is a cutoff that we use to hide the jet job, which you've probably seen in some of my earlier videos. Anyway, I was fortunate that the end of the hidden staging yard comes out by Ballard, and so we got some natural light in there. And I'm able to monitor the trains on the very end of the staging yard, which can be really handy. Of course, this blue foam here is just the other side of the scenery that you saw earlier in the video. Now, let's get out of here. Well, thanks for sticking with me. That's the end of this long tour of the entire railroad, brought to you by a double-stack train that we just accidentally decided to run in the middle of July 2022. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and we'll come back for many more. And in the meantime, this is your host, Burr Stewart, wishing you much fun with trains.